We've been talking a lot in this class about how to explore opportunities after your degree program or during your degree program for employment afterwards, and what kinds of skills you need to develop here in order to be the most competitive for those types of positions. But a lot of you will be starting your own businesses. A lot of you will be working in companies that only have a few people, and maybe they're something that were kind of your brainchild. And what we're going to talk about today is startups, intellectual property, and small businesses. And that will end up, hopefully this information will affect around like a third of you who go into these types of roles and life adventures. Honestly, some of you may kind of have the entrepreneurial gene. How many of you are thinking about starting your own company, your own business? Cool. I mean, I know my dad ran a dry cleaner tailor shop. His dad did before him. My dad's dad was born in Sicily, and I actually don't know what my dad's dad did in Sicily, but when he came to America, he started a dry cleaner tailor shop. And I know that my dad never really could have worked for anybody else, like even though it was kind of a small shop, just had one or two employees at any time. But I think I got that sort of interest from him in doing my own thing. And one of the reasons that being a professor works for me is that there are not that many jobs where you get to be your own boss in a STEM field this early in life. I mean, I had my job, after grad school and postdoc, and then after that, it was really just the department chair that had some influence over my teaching assignments, but I didn't really have a boss, like a boss. Hey, do this, do this, do this. And even in teaching assignments, I had some control. Like I volunteered for this position. The course that I teach in my home department in nanoengineering is actually something that I didn't create the course, but I sort of created the current content. So there's a lot of flexibility. And in the research lab, as long as a professor can get the work funded by a funding agency, they can do it. So it's, maybe you have many, you could consider it that you have many bosses because you're sort of on the hook with all of your program managers at different federal and state agencies or different philanthropists that give you money and expect some kind of research outcome. But for the most part, this kind of a job is a bit like a small business, particularly from the standpoint of the research lab. Sometimes people ask me if I would ever consider moving into private industry, and the first thing I think in my head is that I can't really engineer a widget. Like I'm pretty good at research, but it would be very hard for me to like come up with like a well-functioning product. Like I'm a chemical engineer, but I don't even do my own pool. I'm a chemical engineering professor, but I don't even do my own pool chemicals. So like how good could I be there? And so the only other real positions that I would even sort of consider doing would be boss of my own company. So maybe if there was a technology that came out of my lab, I would consider building a business around it, and maybe going on leave from my academic role to do that. It's pretty uncommon, but it does happen in academic life. So if some of you who raised your hands who are thinking about starting your own business after college, I definitely, can empathize. But you don't have to be an academic to be your own boss, obviously. There are a lot of different types of jobs that allow you a lot of professional agency over your own time and how you spend it. So the plus side is that, yeah, you have this freedom and professional agency, personal agency, but the downside is that what like a hunter-gatherer thousands of years ago, what you kill is what you eat. and you have to wear all the hats and spend a lot of time doing it. So you are sometimes you have to clean up your space, like with a vacuum cleaner and so on. But then the next day you're doing procurement and HR, and then the next day the toilet overflows and you have to fix that yourself because you don't have the budget to hire somebody to hire a plumber. So there are sort of these different personal reasons why you would take this type of job or this type of career opportunity, or not. And a lot of what you decide to do has to do with your own risk tolerance in life. So starting a business is risky. If you're trying to start like a high growth startup that is like what eventually became Facebook and Meta and Google and so on, 90% of those companies end up not making any money and failing and losing all their investors' money. The percentage is probably somewhat, less for small businesses that kind of occupy a spot on Main Street, like a dry cleaner tailor shop, or a food service, like a restaurant, or a donut shop, or a medical practice, or a dental practice, or a tax consultancy or something. But there is some more risk there. Working in a big company, like a big blue chip company with thousands of employees, gives you a lot of career security, although you can still get laid off. But it does offer you career security in the standpoint that you're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. And there is an enormous amount of personal equanimity, to use an SAT word. There's a degree of calmness that comes with that. It doesn't occupy your brain cells to be stressed out about, am I even going to be able to pay myself in the next pay cycle? Like somebody who runs their own business where they have to, the only take-home pay is really what business they generate using their own hard work and gumption and connections. Some people like to start a business because they enjoy doing different things on different days. I know that's one of the appealing parts about my job. I actually enjoy grading papers. Not every day, but I do enjoy reading student work and even, correcting math problems and so on, math problems in engineering such as they are. And every day is different. But, if you're the type of person that likes having a defined task, then working in a blue chip company at a consistent type of job is something that can provide a lot of, again, mental security and emotional security as well. So there are a few different types of small businesses and types of self-employment. There are the types of things that you can do where you can work from home and you don't require a physical infrastructure. For example, freelance consulting, whether that's technical consulting, financial consulting, media consulting, artistic consulting. So I have a family friend who does art for TV shows in Hollywood that you've seen, like that we've all seen. And he does his work from his at-home studio on his granted fairly nice, at-home computer and graphic design setup. Other types of designers, so landscape architecture and things like that. Writers generally work from home. In other places, if you're a writer that works for a big institution like UC San Diego Communications Department, okay, then you have an office and you're here a few times a week, especially after COVID, where the number of times per week that you're actually in an office tends to decrease. Then there's kind of the tier of small businesses where it does require a physical infrastructure, but you don't tend to need a ton of support staff. For example, I'm going to keep using the example of a dry cleaner shop because that's the type of job I did as a teenager. And food service shops, certain types of retail, where you're kind of the sole proprietor, but you have a couple of people that work there along with you. And then there are private practices that require a lot of professional certification and a much bigger staff. And those include architectural firms, law firms, other types of law practices like accounting, family medicine clinics, dentists, optometrists, and so on. And in those types of businesses, as the founder of that type of business, you probably don't want to be the one doing the dental procedure if that's the type of business you start, and the one doing the procurement of gloves and epoxy fillings and you don't want to be the one dealing with insurance companies. That takes a specialized kind of person that does that job for 40 hours a week. So it's not just you're hiring another cashier while you do some of the, cooking in the background or creation, but that is more like a bigger business in that you have this kind of division of labor. And a lot of what you decide to do depends on your own personality fit and risk assessment, as I mentioned. In this regard, it's actually quite similar to your investment strategy for retirement. And most college students don't spend a lot of time thinking about their retirement for obvious reasons. It's going to be a long time in the distance, but it might be worth thinking a little bit about it in the way that it makes you think about yourself and what kind of risk you're willing to tolerate. I will give you an example from my own life. Okay, so because I'm a state employee, I have a pension from the University of California. I have the option, and I can't do anything, I can't mess around with that pension. It's a defined contribution. Some of my benefits go in there every month. And that goes into a big pension fund. The University of California invests that pension fund so that when I retire, I'll get a certain payout every month from the interest that is accrued from that contribution to the pension fund. And it will, how much a public worker gets is sort of the result of how long they've been in the system, how much money they were making at the time of their retirement, and so on. There's another part of the retirement system for public employees, which is called the 403B or 457B. You can apply to either one of those. Those are tax deferred spending accounts. So you put that money into Fidelity or some other financial services company, and that's a lot like a 401k that you would put money into if you were working in the private sector. And so there are these different investment vehicles that might come through as a result of your work situation. There are other types of investment vehicles that are regarded as low risk. Those are called index funds, so market tracking index funds, the most famous of which are Vanguard. Vanguard is the name of the financial services company that sell low fee market tracking index funds. So if the Dow goes up or if the S&P 500 goes up, your holdings go up because there is a big diversity in investments in that particular fund portfolio that is designed to track the market as closely as possible. So for example, if somebody invested I'm not going to do the compound interest in my head, but if someone invested a few $1,000s 50 years ago, they'd have $1 million now, just because of how the interest that compounds, that reinvests, that increase the principal balance, that then increase again and again and again and again every time the market goes up. If they cash out now, they'd be rich, even though they didn't put in that huge amount of money early on. There are other types of investment vehicles. Another is bonds. So you can also go to, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but hopefully this is somewhat useful. There are bonds, which are the way that the federal government takes on debt. So they sell bonds to private individuals. The private individuals put money into these bonds. You can also buy a bond mutual fund, which invests in a bunch of different bonds with different rates of return and so on, and you can actually collect a dividend from that as a means of passive income. You can either spend that money or have it reinvested automatically. For example, financial services companies like Vanguard will also do that. So, the more when you go from for pension, public pension, 401k, 403b, 457b, all of these instruments that are available to people that work with big organizations, if you're working for yourself, you have to do a lot more work. If you start a business, you have to do a lot more work to figure out how you're going to save for retirement or save for a catastrophic emergency, for example, a sick family member or an illness, God forbid. So, real estate is another thing that people invest in, either your own house, if you happen to own property in Southern California and you bought it 10 years ago, you're like rich now. Unfortunately, that also prices people out of the market in places like San Diego, which apparently are now the most expensive zip code to live, and where we currently are now at UCSD. So these are also things that people consider to be investment vehicles. Investment properties, where you get rental income, works the same way as a bond dividend, where after that investment, you just collect the cash, right? Although being a landlord has its own set of difficulties, and the extent to which you call it passive income is a little bit shaky. So, what distribution of investments should you make in your life? There's no set answer. No one was going to predict COVID, right? If someone was forced to sell all their stocks in April of 2020, they would have lost everything, right? The stock market recovered, but what if they had to, or what if it didn't recover, right? No one can predict that kind of stuff. So you want to have I'm an analytical STEM person, right? So I spent most of my life thinking there is a right way to do this. There is a surefire way to do this. All I have to know is what goes into the equations and everything, and this is the right strategy. But no, investing doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. So whether you're considering a job in an established company with a regular paycheck, or a small business venture, or you want some high growth startup that you're trying to start because you had an idea for an app or a consumer product or something, the decision to do that, there is literally no right answer, and it depends on how much risk you are willing to tolerate. How much is that going to stress you out? Either one way or the other. Maybe it stresses you out to have a boss. Maybe it stresses you out not to have a boss and to have to eat what you kill. And the only right answer is that it depends on you. It depends on your own metacognition, so to speak. Another thing I wanted to say that's sort of unique to being a professor is that the universities are very slippery about the money that a faculty member makes, whether it's the faculty member's money or whether it's the lab's money. Because, so we make a certain base salary. Some of you who go on into academia will experience this, but some of you, but even if you don't, just by the fact that you're at an R1 institution, you might be curious to know this. So faculty members make a 9-month base salary. Let's say it's $100,000, which would be about right for an assistant professor coming in after doing a postdoc. $100,000. And that's what they make for 9 months. And so they don't technically get paid over the summer, a lot like a school teacher. But just like a school teacher, that 9-month salary is divided into 12-month increments. So you still technically get paid in the summer, but nominally you are not paid in the summer. It's just that they know that we would spend all our money in June on candy and video games, and then we'd have nothing for July, August, and September. Had nothing, saved up. Just kidding, we're not that, careless, I guess. So there are ways for professors to earn money in the summer. We can get that by teaching in the summer. We can do it by doing a service role. So I get half of my summer paid for by my associate dean job, which is a job on top of my research and teaching job. We can get paid, the most common way, however, for professors to get paid during the summer is to write that summer month into grants. Because sure as I'm standing here, there's not a single professor on this campus that is not working over the summer on some research project. And so they will write that summer salary into the grant to the Department of Energy or National Institutes of Health or National Science Foundation or California, environmental protection or wherever they're getting their grant funding from. And so the University of California allows you to do this thing where if you have 3 grants with 1 summer month each, so now you have 12 months fully supported. But let's say you have 3 more grants. Let's say you're a super successful professor that has like 6 grants, all with a month of salary each. You can fold that salary into your base salary on a temporary basis. So you can actually increase your salary by up to 30%, which is now the new base rate on top of which your summer salary is calculated. And the whole point of this is you can earn, if you get a lot of grants, you could earn as a professor 60 to 70% more than your base salary by getting all of these grants. And there are some people who would argue, this is a little bit of inside baseball, that it is actually in the university's best interest to allow this because every time we get a grant and we pay ourselves salary, we pay the university a tax. The tax is called indirect costs or overhead. And the indirect costs or overhead are literally what keeps the lights on. It's the money that goes in the general pool along with tuition money and payout from certain types of financial investments. And that money, which is the high value money that they can do anything with, the university really wants that money. So they said, fine, spend it on yourselves, spend as much as you want of it on your own salaries, because that increases the amount of money that the university collects as well to do things like pay staff, run the air conditioner, pay for the batteries that it's running these speakers and so on. So anyway, just in case you find that interesting. What I would say is that sometimes if a professor, it's probably more detail than you want to know, sometimes if a professor does not take those months or even the summer months and they just spend it on research, which is within their right to do, then some of them view that as a tax-deductible donation to a nonprofit organization, meaning your own lab, which ordinarily would violate all kinds of ethics laws if you were doing that, if you were donating to a nonprofit that you controlled. But since you're technically donating it to the school by not taking it as salary, then you can say, well, if I spend the money on research by not taking it as salary, maybe I can get a faster career acceleration. Or maybe that research will lead to a patent, and that patent will lead to a company, and then I'll make $1 billion and it will all be worth it. Does that ever happen? Not that I've ever thought about these things. Okay, so patents. We've talked about the small businesses of the type like food services, restaurants, tailor shops, dental and law and medical practices that occupy just one little footprint. It's not part of a bigger, bigger organization. And those are sort of like companies where you sell to consumers. Sometimes you sell to other businesses, that's fine, but typically you're not on Main Street, right? You have some business that has some warehouse or manufacturing plant somewhere. And that's another kind of small business. But when we think of the word startups, we're generally not talking about mom and pop businesses, even though they started up. When we talk about startups, we're talking about Google in the late 90s, early 2000s. We're talking about Facebook in the mid 2000s. We're talking about Moderna and BioNTech, who invented the mRNA vaccines for COVID. Those are the kinds of high growth, exponential growth startups that people have this sort of romantic feeling, that where they're associated with this sort of romanticism about the founder who dropped out of college and had some idea and maybe they had a patent and they're now one of the world's richest people. So how do those happen? Well, since we are in a university, I'll talk about this from the university, from the standpoint of a student or a professor in a university. So let's say you're working in a lab and you come up with an invention and you used university resources to make the invention. That invention, you can file what's called a provisional patent on, and you can do that. You can submit almost anything to the US Patent and Trademark Office that will count as a provisional patent, but usually it's the manuscript of the paper, the scientific paper that you're going to submit to a peer-reviewed journal, and that gets taken by a patent lawyer who turns it into kind of like a patent light. And they submit that to the US Patent and Trademark Office. I don't think it actually gets read there. The only reason to submit that thing, the provisional patent, is to establish a priority date. The priority date means you invented it. Now, you may not have invented it, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment. So then you have this patent. You have this provisional patent. You can now talk about it to your friends and colleagues and family without worry that they're going to steal it and get a priority date that supersedes yours, because yours is already in. So by the end of the 12-month, there's a 12-month period where that provisional patent for your invention in the lab has to be converted to a patent application. The patent application is a formal legal document that has all of the technical details written in it, and that legal document is written with immense care by a patent attorney, and it could cost in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $90,000, depending on the complexity of the patent, for the patent attorney to write it. Now, if you are a student or a professor, where are you going to get that money? Sometimes the university will front the money in exchange for something. And that something could be an equity stake in the company that might be formed as a result of that patent. Or it might be the promise of patent royalties from a bigger company or an existing company that wants to get a license to that patent. So the university is the assignee or the owner. It's technically the assignee, but you can think about it as the owner of the patent. And then they will distribute licenses to companies. Sometimes, if the student or faculty member wants to start a company based on that patent or that patent application at that point, they will say, okay, you can have an exclusive license. We're not going to license this to anyone else. We don't want anyone to compete with you because you invented it. But we're going to say, our offer is you can get a license, but we want 30% of the common stock in your company once you have shares. Once you have your capitalization table, we want a third of that. Sometimes they might negotiate a licensing fee from the company. Regardless of what happens, that patent application goes to the next step, which is a 1 to 3-ish year review by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and a patent examiner at the USPTO will take a look at all the claims, search it exhaustively against everything else that's ever been published, and tell you whether or not you got the patent. Now, there are a list of items in the patent called claims, which are the meat of the patent, that say this invention consists of this, this, and this, or this, or this, or this, or this, and it covers as much ground as possible. And what the patent examiner does is they can say, okay, claims 1, 3, and 7, those have already been shown, so we're gonna cut those. You can have the rest. It's possible for the inventor and or the lawyers to travel to Washington, D.C. or to talk to the patent examiner and to explain to them in real time why those claims should remain as part of the patent. And then they'll consider it. There will be a back and forth, almost like a trial. And then eventually, if things go well, it goes from a patent application to a fully granted patent. Now, let's say that you are a student or a faculty member who wants to start a company. Chances are you have started a company already on the basis of the patent application or even at the provisional stage, because even just having that provisional with strongly worded claims will be enough in many cases to take to an investor to say, this has been sufficiently de-risked, we have a strong patent application, invest in our company so we can hire people and get this business off the ground. Funding. How are startups financed? The first step is that if you are spending all your time doing it, you probably will not be collecting a paycheck for a little while. The first round is sort of known as the friends and family round. Now, if you're a professor and you start a company, you already have your university salary to fall back on. Maybe you won some small business plan competitions and that will give you some money. That's often how university startups work. So they call it the friends and family round. You could also include Indiegogo and Kickstarter in that round, where you're getting small cash donations that you can use on anything. Oftentimes, the equity deals that you work out with those investors are pretty lax. Sometimes people just want to help you out. The next round, if you have something promising to show, is an angel investor round. And the word so what is an angel investor? An angel investor is an individual or group of individuals, which is sometimes called a super angel, which will consist of people with professional salaries, doctors, dentists, lawyers, people that make a lot of money in sales or, other types of well-paying but not enormously well-paying jobs. So well-off people but not rich. And they pool their money together and they might use some expertise that they have or experience they have and put money into your company. And that could be a couple of $1 million. The next round is called the venture capital round. That is, they use the acronym VC. So a VC is a professional organization that is made of former entrepreneurs, former business people, lawyers, finance people who raise funds from what are called limited partners. What are those funds? They could be high net worth individuals, or where do those funds come from? They could be high net worth individuals. They could be public pension funds. They could be private pension funds, like University of California Pension Fund probably has some of its money in venture capital. Rich people's retirement money. And venture capitalists are good at getting those funds to them. They raise this fund, then they distribute that money. Maybe they have $100 million in it and they're going to invest 10 bunches of $10 million each. And the venture capital, the VC, because they have business experience, they usually only invest in areas within their technical domain. So if it's a biotech VC, they will only invest in biotech. If it's consumer internet companies or VC, they're only going to invest in consumer internet companies. And as a result, they want to have some say over the management structure. So they'll take a huge equity stake, like 50% or more, just give or take, and they'll get some board seats, so they'll have some direction over the steering. In your term sheet that you get from them, they might make some changes to the management of the company. They might take the nerdy professor founder and say, you don't have any business experience, we're going to move you to a scientific advisor role, or something like that. There's one financial instrument that I forgot to tell you about, that is government grants. So every government funding agency has the mandate to spend a certain amount of its budget, like 5% or something, on grants. And those are small business grants that typically go to these high growth startups, and they're called SBIRs or STTR grants. And those are written just like an academic research grant, except you also have to make a business case. They're often reviewed by people in academia who have some technical expertise when it's a STEM-based startup company. That's all I wanted to say about that. And then ideally, once you get your venture capital money, you make a prototype, you start having some customers, either in the consumer space or the business space. Some people would say that having a business-to-business company has sort of an easier business model because you have fewer people to deal with. You don't have to make as many business connections. You just sell it to somebody that needs to put it in their product. These are original equipment manufacturers, OEM companies. They sell their product. And a lot of these companies make a ton of money, but you've never heard of them because they sell to other companies. So let's say that every cell phone tower manufacturer needs some specific kind of circuit that solves some particular kind of wireless problem. And there's this one company that solved that problem. And that little circuit board or whatever, gets inserted into that thing. And it's invisible to you, right? You're on the internet and you never know that that's in there, but some entrepreneur, some technical entrepreneur made a bunch of money by selling that widget to this other company. Same thing is true for medical diagnostics, for example, where you sell a test for an existing testing platform, sell some reagent for some existing testing platform. Totally, part of the economy where we know exists, but we're very seldom aware of because they don't make it into the news. It's not a direct-to-consumer company. All right, so ultimately, in these high-growth startups, they're considered a success if they have what's called a liquidity event. And a liquidity event is typically either an acquisition, which is when another company, say it's the cell phone tower maker, just making this up, who buys the company that makes that critical component. Say it's Instagram that gets purchased by Facebook, or YouTube that gets purchased by Google. Those are examples of high-profile acquisitions. The other liquidity event is, or exit. Liquidity event means that it generates cash for the founders, liquid assets. The other area is, the other type of liquidity event is an initial public offering or an IPO, where the company wants to go on its own and becomes a public company. It's usually quite big at that point, and now they're a publicly traded company where private investors can just put money in just by buying and selling shares, just like you would with any other company in the stock market. Another type of technical company that employ all kinds of people are contract manufacturing organizations, CMOs, and contract research organizations, CROs, where there are many times pharmaceutical companies are a good example. Pharmaceutical companies are best at doing those last few, let's say you're trying to make a drug that has 30 carbon atoms in it and 50 hydrogen atoms in it and 10 nitrogen atoms in it. They're very good at doing the last few steps of that chemical manufacturing, but damned if they're going to make 1,000,000 kilograms of some basic starting material. So they will outsource that to a CMO, contract manufacturing organization. And then up the value chain, you have companies that make intermediates that are even of greater complexity. Like say 20 of the carbon atoms are already installed, where AstraZeneca doesn't want to do that, but there's a company that's willing to do it for them if the price is right. Contract research organizations are organizations in any field. This could be in consumer surveys, it could be in technical fields, it could be in physics or engineering or biology, where a company needs to know an answer to a certain thing, but it doesn't have the expertise in-house to do this research. So they set up a research contract with a contract research organization. And those are other types of STEM companies that don't fit the mold of a typical, a company that's consumer facing or a high growth startup. So with that, one thing I'll probably do before the course is over, because we actually don't have that many weeks left, is go through some of my own personal experiences with startups and various roles that I've had in them. And we can talk about case studies as to how these small businesses and startups actually get created and how they're doing and what sorts of jobs are available in those areas. So with that, I'm happy to take questions for the next 2 minutes.